So without further ado, let me just introduce myself. So I'm Benjamin Sharp. I'm Senior Investment Manager at FX. I have Pal with me as well. Pal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I am Paul Linares. I am also Senior Investment Manager at Ethics, and I have been working with John and the Big Solar team during the due diligence process to before this offer was launched.
Great, thank you so much, Pal. A little bit of housekeeping from me as well. So this is probably going to run about 30 to 45 minutes. As I said before, we're going to hear about John's new project. We're looking at a 5.5% if ISA eligible bond offer. So we're going to speak a little bit more about that and also hear obviously of about the Whiteborough Solar Park from John. So John, let me hand it over to you for your introduction.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ben. So yeah, I'm John Halley. I'm Chief Exec of Big Solar Co-op. Um, don't know how far to go back into my background. I started off as an environmental activist, I suppose, quite young. My parents were into organic farming, and I lived my whole life under the slightly doomful shadow of climate change. And I guess I started off as a protester, but I was a really bad protester because I never really believed that protesting on its own would do much. And I was always a little bit intrigued as to what you could do if you just tried to
Mm,
get hold of some of the levers of power and make things happen.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
it took me a while to, yeah, it took me a while to discover co-ops,
Hmm, hmm.
um, and by which time I was already working with renewable energy. So I took a job with Energy for All, who are one of the kind of pioneers of community energy, as it's now called in the UK. And we started a spin-off from Energy for All called Share Energy, which I'm sure people on the call are familiar with. Many people will be familiar with. Um, and Share Energy's worked across the UK, setting up renewable energy co-ops across different technologies. Many of them solar, but not all of them. Also wind and hydro and heat and other things. Um, and really, big solar co-op came out of that. So we realized that small solar co-ops were going to be really hard to sustain in the post-subsidy environment when the feed-in tariffs were taken away. And indeed, that's proved to be the case. You know, there are lots of good solar co-ops in the UK, but almost all of them started with feed-in tariff and were established by the time it went. So big solar co-ops sort of started off as this kind of mechanism for making solar co-ops as a model continue. And what we found that was sort of surprising, really, was that we'd also made a bit of a machine to fill a gap in solar delivery overall in the UK
Yes.
context.
Yeah.
And if you look at those sort of deployment curves, you can see that solar started off really hard after the end of
Mm,
subsidy. Things went a bit wrong, but
mm,
domestic solar has taken off again. Very large scale solar has taken off again, but pretty much medium scale solar has flatlined
mm,
between 50 kilowatt and 5 megawatts, say. So that's every large roof and pretty much every
yeah.
smallish field, right?
Mm,
Very little has been built. And we realized there was a few reasons behind that, but one was that people didn't have access to the finance to do it. Another one was expertise. And a really big one was trust. So if they're being approached by anyone, it was often a commercial operation where they didn't really trust them. And so we walk through the
yes.
door as a not-for-profit, and we get to build solar that's otherwise not being built. So that becomes very 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 exciting that we're filling a gap there, and it's not just about doing something that a commercial organization could have done and bringing a community or cooperatively owned slant to it, but actually there's additionality. We're doing something more.
Fantastic, John. That's a really useful introduction. Thank you. Could you also maybe speak a little bit briefly about the projects that you've done recently and how you've built up to this bond raise now?
Yeah, so I mean, our main focus to date has been rooftop solar.
Mhm.
I would have said a year ago we were in a kind of startup phase. Now I'd say we're in a ramp up phase. So we've got a large pipeline of rooftop
Mm.
solar projects that we're
Mhm.
working our way through.
Mhm.
We've built 11 so far, well, 12 depending on the news I get from the latest rooftop, because one's being built at the moment. Um,
Fantastic.
and those are increasingly across the UK, starting off with the Midlands, but we're starting to build outside that kind of heartland now, and they really span a whole bunch of different types of buildings. So there's one on a doctor's surgery, there's one on a listed building, which is
Mm.
a hotel. There
Mm.
are a couple on industrial buildings, some quite large arrays, a 600 kilowatt rooftop array on an industrial
Fantastic.
building. A school, a range of different types of buildings.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you're able to your expertise spans the whole gamut of different sites and opportunities, really.
Yeah, I mean, we have this kind of rule of thumb. If you've got a roof that's bigger than a tennis court, which at the moment with Wimbledon, everybody knows exactly how big that is.
Yes.
And if you're spending more than, say, £1 grand a month on
Mm.
electricity, then our model could work there.
Fantastic. Fantastic, John. Thank you. Brilliant. So, just a few questions really on this new project that you've launched with us on the ethics platform. Could you give us a short rundown of that if you're able to?
Sure. So we, as I said, we've been focusing on rooftop solar, but actually this Whiteborough Solar Park project is something we've been working on in the background pretty much from the beginning of Big Solar Co-op.
Mhm.
Um, because the same considerations apply. What's not getting built? Solar on big rooftops, solar in smallish fields, or on other types of suitable land, which is not great land for agriculture. And what's happened is that the economics of solar farms has moved so that solar farms that are being developed by commercial developers are
Right.
enormous and
Yeah.
increasingly controversial and increasingly competing with
Mhm.
agricultural use. And
Mhm.
that's not somewhere we wanted to go, and it's not somewhere we would compete
Mhm.
sensibly. But we wanted to look at the right type of ground mount solar projects. And when we found the Whiteborough site, which had been partly developed by another community energy organisation who decided not to proceed with it because they had too many projects on,
Right.
I thought, yeah, this is great because
Mm.
it's the right scale. It's a 10-acre site, so putting solar on it doesn't completely change the landscape for
Mm.
miles around.
Mhm.
It's also so the site itself is not being used for agriculture. There are a couple of horses on it. It's grade 4 agricultural land, so there's no sort of competition with food there. But it's got this wonderful backstory that it was an open cast mine until the 60s, and the kind of the poetry of that situation wasn't lost on us. The other thing that's really exciting about it to me was right from the beginning, we wanted to look at using second life solar panels to
Mm.
build a solar farm because you've got a
This is really
situation.
interesting, John.
Yeah,
Yeah, this hasn't been done, I think.
it hasn't as far as we know, it hasn't been done. I mean, it's not
Mm.
it's not like there's a database somewhere of exactly what every solar park or solar farm has been built
Yeah.
with, but
Yeah.
the logic of it is that essentially solar panels have improved over time. They're more efficient nowadays, which means that they can produce more energy per unit area. They're not
Yes.
really in any other way better.
Mm.
So panels which are 10 years old are good for another probably 20 years, um, but not quite as efficient in terms of space. And what we have at Whiteborough is we have quite a lot of space, but we have a very restricted grid connection.
Oh, right. Okay.
So we're trying to max out that grid connection, and it makes
Mm.
sense to build an oversized or high DC-AC ratio site
Yes.
in the jargon,
Yeah.
where basically we're generating we're generating at peak or close to peak more of the time. We're squeezing more
Mm.
down that
Mm.
pipe,
Mhm.
and a really nice way of doing that is to have we've got a 2 megawatt grid connection, roughly 2 megawatts of new panels and then 1.5 megawatts of second life solar panels. So those are
Fantastic.
providing the kind of additional
Mm.
squeeze on the day like today, which is a bit overcast, where we wouldn't be getting close to saturating our grid connection. We can
Mm.
saturate it.
Mm.
So, and this is
Fantastic.
the big problem that solar farms are taking up a lot of grid capacity without necessarily filling it all the time.
Mm.
So we're trying to broaden that out with this project.
Very good, John. So you mentioned also that you're going to have some new panels there as well. I know you're very ethically minded and you've been ethically minded from the very start.
Yeah.
Could you just touch upon that and where you're sourcing these panels from and what the ethical issues are with solar
Sure,
panels?
sure. So, I mean, this is something that really came to my attention with this report from Sheffield Hallam University in
Mm,
2019,
mm.
which really laid out the involvement of forced labour practices in the solar supply chain in a very stark and well documented way. It still
Mm.
remains, the kind of the best report on the subject, and
Or standard, yeah.
yeah, and they've followed up with a couple more. But that was shocking to me. Uh, and then we started to engage with the solar industry to find out, well, can we buy panels that are not implicated in this practice? And the short answer was very nearly no, that an awful lot of the polysilicon that's used in panels that you might buy from most of the manufacturers potentially does come from Xinjiang and potentially does come from facilities
Yeah,
that are implicated in forced labor. I mean, even today, we're 6 years later, and there are various industry initiatives, but they still don't supply chain auditing. And once we understood that, we were unable to accept it. I mean, even to the point you say, well, do you want to build solar where you are sponsoring, slavery effectively? And that's the way that morally it seems to me, and it's hard to escape that
it
conclusion.
is very hard, yeah. But
Yeah,
you
and
found,
it's a big problem because it is hard for people also who want to do the right thing to do the right thing. So what we did is we found a manufacturer where we could independently ascertain what their supply chain was. Most of our panels will come from Meyer Burger, who've been making
fantastic.
panels in Germany, but with German polysilicon. So it doesn't matter where the module is made; it matters where they're getting their raw materials.
Yeah, yeah,
Unfortunately, Meyer Burger have now stopped production in Germany. So the companies still exist. They're still keeping to their warranties. They've existed for quite a long time.
they have, yeah.
But we're now buying stock from their last production in Europe. There are a couple of manufacturers we can look at there. So yeah, in a way, the second life solar thing is a bit. It just reminds me of buying clothes. You go to, I don't know, Benui or Finisterre or somewhere like that, trying to get Patagonia, trying to get ethical clothes, or in a way, a step up is just go to a charity shop,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's what we're doing. But I should say we're not going to a place where somebody's got a pile of old panels and we've been offered a load of those. We are decommissioning an existing solar farm that's running today.
Mm.
That means that we've got all the data. We know which panels are pucker, and we
Yeah,
also decommission it ourselves. So we're taking it down and rebuilding it. And that's
yeah,
crucial
yeah.
because that means we can make sure that it's all done in the right way and we can ensure quality.
Well, that's great, John. It seems to me that you're a very thoughtful person and you're very considered in your approach, and obviously you're very motivated by green issues, but it's such a pleasure to hear to what extent you're trying to make the right choices all the way through the
But it's
supply
this
chain.
notion of a just transition. I mean, there's always trade-offs to be made, but I mean, you look back in history, and it, allowing yourself to turn a blind eye to slavery is not one of those trade-offs that
No,
you can
that's
make.
right. Yeah, and you want to be able to, tell your grandkids and be written down in the history books as someone who did the right thing. So I
Right,
think
yeah.
you're doing well.
Anybody's going to write history books about us, but let's just try and get it right now,
Yeah,
as far as we can.
absolutely.
And part of that is also lobbying. So I'm involved in talking to Desnares and to GB Energy and trying to just make it a little bit harder for them. So that they actually they've made some nice statements about it. So just to make sure that that gets followed through properly.
Yeah, well done, John. Well done. Okay, I do have another question, another few questions for you, if you're still
Yeah, yeah,
happy
yeah.
to run through them.
Happy, yeah.
So, obviously, this is a bond offering. This is new for Big Solar Co-op, I think, as opposed to with drawable shares. Could you just touch a little bit about why bonds and where the money is going to how the money is going to be used and so on? That would be really useful, I think, for
Yeah, I
investors.
mean, I think we've raised about 2 million so far through community shares, and that's
Mm.
been great for us because people are coming in early or have been coming in relatively early um, as members.
Mm.
And I should mention we have investor members. We also have volunteer members, so we have two classes of membership there. Um, we've always had in the back of our mind we'd like to do a bond off. We know from talking to people who like to support community energy in general that many people like the bond offer, and particularly, with the IFISA wrapper, that makes it possible for people to invest more, or it brings in other investors who wouldn't really be that keen on shares. So it's always been something in our minds to do. And FX, we've known FX for, I mean, since FX started. So
Mm.
so we have this sort of relationship that
Mm.
goes back. And I think we wanted to have a project that kind of fitted with the bond offer, so the two things went together. I mean,
Mhm.
ultimately, the bonds are bonds that are issued by Big Solar Co-op. They're not ring fenced with the Whiteborough project, but we need the money to build Whiteborough.
Cool.
So,
Yeah.
so it seemed like a really nice. It seemed like this was the time to do it. A really good packaging that all came together.
That's
And in terms of
fantastic.
what the money be spent on, I mean, just looking at it's interesting to look at the kind of breakdown of a solar farm financing, or
Mhm.
so we call it solar park. Solar farms is now implying something so big that we tend to call it a solar park. But I was looking at it this morning. 54% of that money goes on installation
Yeah.
costs,
Yeah.
mountings, and site stuff.
Mhm.
Um, 30% on the big electrical stuff, so connection
Right.
to the grid and the high voltage cables that get
Yeah.
from the grid connection point to the site.
Yeah.
And then 8% development costs,
Mhm.
8% solar panels. I mean, solar panels used to be by far the largest ticket item, and now, even with our ethical sourcing, they're only 8% of the total.
Well, it's very interesting how you break that down as well. And our investors may be used to rooftop solar. Um, Solar parks are a different ball game, aren't they? I mean, you speak about the costs are significant when you're transmitting that much electricity as well.
Yeah, I
It's
mean, we've
interesting.
got to connect to the grid. We've got to essentially get somebody to trench right down the road, over a railway bridge, up into the town, and then connect at a slightly random place in the middle of a housing estate where nobody would naturally imagine that there would be quite a big grid connection to be had. But so that adds a lot of costs to the undertaking, and that's one of the reasons why these projects are hard to make viable at a smaller scale, because those costs are quite high. The other thing is, there's other costs on solar parks that you just don't get on roofs. One of them is security,
That's right. Yeah. 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 So you need to fence it properly. You need cameras and so on.
TV, and the rest of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Just touching upon cabling and how much effort that takes in terms of labor and so on. Could you speak to us maybe a little bit about the timeline, how long this has been in the pipeline, and how long you foresee the timeline for the installation to be?
Yeah, so actually, the project's got quite a long backstory.
Mm.
Planning
Mm.
permission was obtained years ago,
Mm.
and like a lot of renewable energy projects, it gets sort of passed from hand to hand, and people try and figure
Yes.
out whether they can make it add
Yeah.
up in the different and changing
Yeah.
situations that go on. So we've been attached to a project for sort of 2.5 years. So we've actually started work on site now,
Hmm.
and it's hugely glamorous. You wouldn't believe it. A lot of it is just um, getting a massive digger and moving 80 tons of horse manure from the site. That's one of the things that happens if a site has only been used for horses for many years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as I said, high glamour. Security goes in next with fencing, road improvements, track improvements on the site. The solar panels are turning up into a nearby warehouse in 2 weeks' time.
Fantastic.
The mounting process starts to really happen in September,
Great.
and we
Great.
should be complete. We're aiming to be complete and connected to the grid in December, maybe late November,
Wow.
December.
That's great. I mean, so we are going to see generation of value before the end of the year, basically. And
Yeah, I
that
mean,
sounds
in December you don't generate much solar, so I wouldn't
no,
expect to see
no.
the money flowing in. But our main aim is really all about getting things built while it's still dry.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the
Yeah, you
groundwork, and that's why we're getting ahead with the groundworks now.
fantastic. Well, you're making very good progress, John. Just a couple more. questions from me. So on this bond offer, obviously it's ISA eligible, so there's no a tax on the returns if you're eligible for that, which is great. Can you just explain the structure of how investors will be repaid?
Yeah, so I mean the mechanism, really comes down to earning, doesn't it? So we export energy to the grid, and we get paid for that. Um, at the moment, there are some changes in the way that you can get paid for exporting to the grid. So we're exploring ways of maximizing the value, but we have modeled it down to quite low levels of export, um, and it still works for bondholders even then. I mean, what basically happens is if our export rate were to really crater and go low in the future,
Mm.
um, ultimately it's the shareholders who
Mhm.
take the hit with Big Solar
Mhm.
Co-op. Um,
Mm.
they are the compressible part of the organisation, and our other projects would have to cross subsidise. So
Yeah.
bondholders do rank pretty high here.
Mm.
And so the aim is basically to pull together the capital over 7 years to
Yeah.
repay bondholders at the end. We anticipate that at that point we might need to run another bond offer
Mhm.
because we won't have all that capital back in
Yeah.
hand, or we might refinance through a loan or some other mechanism.
That's
But
great.
so the finances of the project are, I mean, the great thing about ground mount solar is some of the risks of rooftop solar aren't there. So
Mm.
you always got a risk with a building that whoever owns the building will go bust or not look after the building.
Yeah.
That's one risk you really don't have with
Mm.
ground mount projects.
That's reassuring. Thank you. Thank you very much, John. The last question for me, and then we can start looking at questions from the chat. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the investors on the call?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd like to say is, if you please look at the bond offer document in some detail. It's something we worked on a lot with Powell, as he mentioned. Um, Powell has been very harsh and stopped me from putting in the big numbers that I wanted to put in. But very correctly has said, let's have a bond offer which just is based on projections that you can substantiate from what you're already doing. Our ambition is quite a lot larger. Now, we want to grow this more than is shown in the bond offer document, and I think people need to know that they're buying bonds in an organisation which has ambition. We see an awful lot of potential for building mostly more rooftop, but maybe some more similar kind of ground mount schemes as well. And we're going at it as hard as we can. So that's one thing that people need to know. Um, One other little thing you need to know is we don't just want your money. So if people do have ideas, a lot of people I've spoken to have a kind of pet idea for a
Mm.
solar
Mm.
site. They say that roof, I pass it every day, and
Mm.
it ought to have solar on it. And if you're willing to go and talk to the owners of that building, we can even train you up to help you do that. And we've already got several volunteers who've done exactly that, gone to buildings they pass every day, knocked on the door, and we've now installed solar on the roof.
That's
That's a
brilliant,
whole
John.
other strand outside the bond offer. You can become a
Yes,
volunteer member and directly get things built in your community as
that's
well.
very empowering. That's great to know. Thank
Yeah,
you.
but I mean, the last thing is, we don't just want your money, but we do need money to build these things. And I know that there's an opportunity to ask questions here. I also know that people very often have questions they don't want to ask in the round or which occur to them later. So please do send. Easiest way is an email, info@bigsolar.coop. I get an awful lot of emails from people asking about their specific circumstances, specific concerns, and those all get a detailed answer. So
Great.
always very happy to do that.
That's wonderful, John. That's really considered of you. What are the risks that keep you awake at night and that you would least like to talk to us about? That's a great question.
um, I think for Whiteborough specifically, building these kind of projects is quite complex. There's a lot of people to bring together, and there's unknown unknowns when you're dealing with building stuff. I don't think there are super risks to do with it being an old open cast mine because we're not going super deep,
Yeah.
but there, if you get delays, you get costs, and getting everybody lined up together is hard work, and you've got to keep your eye on it. So those are the kind of day-to-day risks. In terms of for that specific project, I, I guess in terms of the wider project, I feel like we're well set with our staff and with our pipeline to build out the kind of numbers of projects that that we've put in the bond offer documents. But I kind of have a little bit of a FOMO feel here that there's a lot more to be done. I mean, we've done, as many people might know, we're working with Mid Counties Co-op and doing 29 of their stores and putting solar on. We're
So,
trying to work with some other chains, and I know that out there's some chains that don't have solar on that we're not talking to that could help us
yes.
move into the really big time really quickly.
Mm.
And it's that kind of thing that I spend my let's say late evenings, my mid
Pondering over.
worrying.
That's great, John. Thank you. I got a bit of a curveball. I think this is probably a bit light-hearted, but it's nice to have something humorous. Jill says, "What happens to the horse manure?"
Well, bring it back. I mean, we actually it's actually quite hard to get rid of that much. If you had a ton, you could drop it at the nearest allotments.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
we,
fantastic.
we we did start by trying to come up with a solution for all the horse manure first, and then we realised that that was actually going to be quite challenging, and we should probably
Yes,
continue
yeah, yeah.
building our solar farm. So we've concentrated on scraping a big space for Arctics to turn around and putting stone on it, and we're dealing with the manure bit by bit, basically.
Great. That's great. Thank
Creative
you.
ideas gratefully received.
Yeah, fantastic, John. Thank you. A couple more questions. Could you elaborate on why a bond offer instead of community shares? Is it just because it's if ISA eligible?
Yeah, I mean, it's not instead of we've been running a rolling share offer from the beginning. We're still running it today. Obviously, there's not much emphasis on it at the moment. We're majoring on our bond offer, but over time, and somebody's mentioned this debt equity ratio. You
Mm.
can't finance something like this entirely out of debt. And we like having members. We're a democratic member owned organization.
Yes, that's
So,
right.
so
Yeah.
we will always continue with that. But the
Mm.
time was we've taken a little bit of debt. In a way, bonds are the best kind of debt from my point of view because we're managing to borrow. We're borrowing money from a large number of members of the public.
Mm.
We're
Mm.
spreading some sense of ownership and through a larger number of people.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, if only thing you wanted to do was build more renewable energy, I mean, I would probably go and work for Ørsted or Statkraft. If you wanted to just build big wind turbines out in the middle of the North
Mm.
Sea, which would be
Mm.
kind of fun, right? But what are we doing here? We're also trying to connect energy to people. We're
Yeah.
trying to give people more agency with regard to the climate emergency. And so, in that regard, bonds are so much better than just going to one relatively faceless lender and saying, lend me 2 million quid, sort of thing.
That's great. Yeah. Again, it's this considered approach that you've kind of shown throughout, John. So it's a really good answer. Thank you. I'll do a couple more questions, or two or three more questions. So Pamela asked, is the 5.5% return annual or after the 7 years?
No, it's annual. It's annual.
Great. Thank you, John. Let's go through a few more. What challenges do you foresee with your 40 new sites goal?
Well, the biggest challenge we ever have with these rooftop projects, and to some extent with other types of project, is legal agreements. So we generally go into a place and they say, yes, we've got a big roof, we've got loads of energy. You can save us how much? I think we saved about 50 grand last year for our hosts, our solar hosts. We've already saved 60 grand for them this year, and it's only just the beginning of July.
Fantastic.
So the business part kind of works for them, but it gets a bit complicated when it comes to the solar leases.
Yeah.
The 40 we've mentioned there are all sites where we're well into the legals and either signed up or through. And so those ones are going to happen. The challenge we have is the next lot. Getting those agreements signed, and people just to understand what our offer is. It's not one that people encounter elsewhere. But I mean, there are still risks for them in they've got to sign up for a long time with us because it takes us a long time to get our investment back. So it's good that people take their businesses seriously, but we're now starting to get enough installs so that we've got, and you can see that on our website. There are some testimonials for people who've signed up with us and are super keen. So that's starting to create more credibility when we walk in the door.
Well done, John. Well done. Okay, I'll go through a couple more. We have so many questions, so I'm trying to get through as many as possible, but if you do a couple more, I think that would be great. One of the questions is, John, if Meyer Burger is not producing new panels anymore, do you have an alternative supplier, or are you relying on second generation panels to fulfill your needs?
So both. I mean, we have used some panels from REC, who also have a clean supply chain. They're slightly more expensive. The Meyer Burger panels were great for us, and we are working through, as you say, Douglas, old stock. We think we'll be able to bridge the gap. What's now happening is there are other supply chains coming up. So there was, as some people will know, quite a push for a US domestic supply chain. Unfortunately, the Trump administration is doing its best to mess that up. But that, and there are some US suppliers, but only supplying to the US market. There's a Southeast Asian supply chain which can be clean. The REC one is a Southeast Asian supply chain which could be clean, and there are emerging new areas. So India is one. And the other one is Europe. So there are serious investments going in producing vertically integrated solar panels in Europe. That's 18 months, 2 years away. So we've got to subsist with relatively few ethical suppliers for that period, but the cavalry are sort of coming.
Well, that's a very positive development, actually, especially to hear from Europe because it's been out of Europe for a little while. Granted, Meyer Burger is German or Swiss. So that's great, John. Thank you for those updates. I'll go for one more. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so I've got one. Is it difficult to get insurance for second-hand panels?
It's this goes to a question somebody else has asked about second-hand solar on a roof. I think second-hand solar on a roof is going to be really, really hard because essentially the insurers are very worried about solar in general at the moment. There's a legitimate basis for this. I mean, in the sort of post-Grenfell era, to an insurer, a solar panel is inflammable cladding.
Yeah.
Right, which it genuinely is, and solar panels have caught fire on roofs, have led to roof fires, some well publicized. So it's hard, and I think it would be quite hard to get insurance in many cases for solar panels on the roof. And I hope that particular project has kind of has worked through that. In a ground mount situation, those kind of concerns don't apply. The types of insurance that are a little bit harder to get on the second-hand solar would be ones that are to do with business interruption or loss of earnings. But because our site it's a 2 megawatt grid connection and 2 megawatts of new solar, in essence, that's not so much of an issue for us.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. Okay, I think we're just about ready to wrap up. John, would you like to have any closing?
Ben,
Oh yeah, go on, pal. Go on. Yeah.
A couple additional questions, John, perhaps from potential investors. One
is,
what will be the target debt to equity ratio, a bit more financial perspective? And second, if it will be possible to go and visit the site to see on-site progress.
Great questions. Thanks, pal.
Yes, okay. Thanks, pal. Yes, I'd seen the debt to equity. We don't have a sort of given aim here. I mean, historically, community energy organizations have tended to work around 50-50, but that's probably very conservative. I think that once we're a little bit more established, we can look to have a slightly larger ratio of of debt to equity, and we're seeing some of the more established community energy organisations that already go there. I wouldn't want to push it as hard as the commercial developers do, where they push it right up to the edge, and that's associated with a whole range of kind of maybe not sharp practice, but commercially acute practice, which isn't really appropriate for a community-led, community-owned organisation. So we can certainly, I mean, at the moment we're sat at more equity than debt, and we can certainly push it quite a lot further than this. It'll be interesting to see how that develops as time goes on. I mean, if we don't grow super fast, we get to a point where earnings start to give us money to invest in new projects, and we're less dependent on new investment. If we grow as fast as I'd like, then we continue to have that nice problem of bringing in more funds. The question about visiting, I mean, at the moment we're not set up for visiting formally, largely because we've got a lot of people who are going to be going on site over the next little while with large pieces of equipment, and who are not actually really, I mean, we'd have to pay them quite a lot more if they were also going to manage visits. And I think we will probably look to be arranging visits post install. Having said that, there's a footpath that runs right across the site. So if anybody wants to go up there and have a look, you can do that at any time. And if people really want to visit while we're building, because I know you don't often get to see the kind of the guts of building a solar park. We look at it. If we had 10 people who wanted to visit, we could arrange a visit maybe in the autumn and go and have a look. It would be quite
Very
fun.
fair. Yeah, very generous of you. Thanks, John. Right, John Powell, any more? Is there anything you would like to add?
Perhaps one question regarding that might be recurring. John, if you have considered using a battery for the project in this case, and what would be the reasons to include it or not to include it?
Yeah, I mean we hear a lot about batteries for solar, and in many of our rooftop projects, they don't necessarily make that much sense, because our rooftop projects, we're generally using pretty much all the energy we generate on site as it's being generated already. There's no particular additional benefit in having an expensive and high carbon battery to store it. The logic of batteries is a bit different on solar parks. I don't think people necessarily realize why batteries are often put next to solar parks. People think that the solar is charging the battery, and that's not what's happening. What's happening is that when you build a solar park, you pay loads and loads of money for a connection to the grid, which at night you don't use. So the battery guys want to come on and stick their battery there and use that connection at night to charge up and discharge.
Right.
That's really 95% of the economics of battery co-location with solar parks. So that is an option. So we've got a bit of land that we could use for that in the future. The project is kind of complicated enough already. The other thing is that batteries are on a real curve at the moment. In the way that solar panels are gently improving, batteries are improving in cost, but also in embodied carbon quite a lot at the moment. So the right time for us to put a battery on that site might not be today, it might be in 2 years' time. And the right structure might not be for us to buy that battery, but to maybe essentially lease somebody else the rights to use our grid connection. So that's definitely something we'll be examining over the coming couple of years.
Great. Thanks, John. All right. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, John, so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Pal, for highlighting those questions. The bond offer will be open on the FX platform until the 26th of September. As we've said previously in this Cuppa Club, John is open to answering any questions from you. So are we. So we will get back to all of these questions in the chat as well that we haven't answered. And if you have any questions ongoing until the end of the bond raise, please let us know, and we'd be more than happy to answer them for you. So thank you. It's goodbye from me. John, Pal, would you like to say your goodbyes?
Yeah, thank you, folks, for all the questions. So many great questions there. I wish we had time to deal with them all live now, but we'll make sure that we answer all of them. Some really interesting issues raised there. And thanks, everyone, for your time and for your support.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. And we'll speak and see you very soon as well, hopefully. Thank you. Bye.